morning. It is such a pleasure and a privilege to be here today with you on this absolutely beautiful stage. I could almost break out into dance. And to have this opportunity to talk to you about how we can think about conservation and behavior change, or how we can view conservation through a behavior lens. So Beehive, thank you for joining me today. I'm also very privileged to work for the Nature Conservancy, where we address the interconnected challenges of climate change and biodiversity conservation. We seek to contribute to global goals of keeping global warming under 1.5 degrees Celsius and conserving 30% of this Earth's waters and lands. And this is going to take a lot of action, a lot of behavior change by millions of people. So every day, countless numbers of people are taking actions in pursuit of their own well-being, the well-being of their families and friends. And how do we align this with nature's interests? How do we motivate individuals and communities to vote for nature? That's the question Eric is here to discuss. That's the question we grapple with at the Nature Conservancy every day. How do we align these disparate interests? So as an economist, I, by default, am convinced that incentives matter. Now, these don't have to be monetary incentives, right? They can be social incentives, they can be moral imperatives, but they matter. So a few years ago, we did a survey of TNC teams to understand what kind of economic, behavioral, and financial instruments were being used in the implementation of conservation. And we were able to identify 31 distinct economic and financial instruments. And these range from payments for ecosystem services to carbon markets to increasingly debt for nature swaps and whatnot. But there were also some 200 distinct projects where there were behavioral instruments that were used, non-monetary type behavioral instruments. We commonly think of behavior being tied to three sources: motivation, ability, and the decision context within which people take actions, right? So TNCs, there were any number of key strategies that TNC teams implemented that had to do with trying to influence these sources of behavior. These had to do with message reframing and message framing. These had to do with increasing awareness and education, a lot of demonstration and modeling, and trying to change social norms through local champions. Now, let's think a little bit about how this might actually play out in the context of specific projects. So TNC operates with partners a project in Tanzania called Tungani, Let's Unite. And it is a combined, integrated health and conservation project. And they actually had a behavioral theory of change in this project. This is an area which has 90% of the chimpanzees in Tanzania. It also has a large human poor population. So the barriers that they saw were related to sort of lack of motivation, associated with changing practices related to deforestation, destructive use of fishing gear, and so on. Lack of knowledge about alternatives, very obvious, right? And social norms that sort of embedded these practices in the local context. And they tried to address these barriers through a variety of strategies. They organized a number of local village agents who were peers, who trained their peers in alternate fishing and agricultural practices. There were something like 11,000 model homes that were organized. And they were, social contexts were influenced through sort of village logs that showcased people's participation and whatnot. Did any of this change anything? So they did a couple of surveys, one at the beginning of the project and one at the end of the project. Not at the end, but 5 years after the project. And what this showed was lower use of destructive gear, some sense that fish catch had improved, some increase in agricultural practices, and mixed results related to human well-being outcomes, which is not surprising given how entrenched poverty is in some of these places. So this is a project that actually had a behavior change component, had behavioral outcomes associated with it, which is very rare in conservation projects. But it didn't have an experimental design, so we couldn't really say what led to what, and it didn't look at households outside the project area, so we couldn't clearly say if the project had impacted these outcomes. Or, we couldn't ascribe causality, as academics like to say. So let me then take you to Bharatpur in Nepal, where we did introduce an experimental design led by my colleague and co-author, Dr. Mani Nepal. If many of you who've been in low and middle income countries know that solid waste management is just a humongous problem in many parts of our world. In Nepal, approximately 50% of the waste that is generated is actually collected. 50% of what is generated because of costs and other reasons. So Mani was very interested in understanding if softer strategies, behavioral interventions could improve the cleanliness of the city. So he undertook a randomized control trial. There were 75 neighborhoods that were treated, 75 that were left as control neighborhoods. And the treatment was through awareness raising workshops. I think there were 1,500 of these, and waste bins that were strategically placed. So the theory of change was that you augment knowledge, you provide sort of a physical nudge, and that will let people to change their behavior. Did they do that? Well, first thing is this was a very low-cost strategy, US $5 per bin and $5 per household for awareness raising. Very low cost relative to infrastructure investments. So there was a 34% average increase in perceived cleanliness of neighborhoods, again, based on surveys before, after, midline, whatnot, and a 13% increase in households' tendency to actually put waste in collection bins versus dumping them. So this just tells you that this is, you can use these softer, low-cost behavioral strategies to complement the sort of infrastructure investments that you want to make in solid waste management to clean the environment in developing countries. So finally, I want to leave you with, based on what I understand, 3 messages as we think about conservation and behavior change. First, let's acknowledge that conservation is all about people's actions. There's so much else that is required, but the nub of it is people's actions. Next, B, very tacky here, ABC, so you can remember. B, let's build a culture of conservation that really understands behavioral considerations, that builds a behavioral theory of change into interventions, that tries to test strategically, where possible, what interventions work and what do not work. Right? That is going to require a culture change within the conservation community. And C, most importantly, conservation nudges, sort of behavioral approaches, seek to improve the public good. We seek to improve nature and its ability to not only help us, but help generations to come. They don't always seek to improve private well-being. So we have to be really, really careful and cautious that the communities that we work with, A, understand our behavioral approaches, and B, consent and really recognize what is going on. So ABC, I'm going to quiz you on this later over the course of the day. Thank you so very much.